Hello everyone. This is What If Rayleigh trained Luffy's Gear 5. Please like and subscribe. 2 likes for next part. If you have any fanfic or what if ideas, please comment them down below. Hello everyone. This is What If Luffy 8 Unknown Mythical Zone. Sorry for the re-upload, I accidentally uploaded What If Rayleigh trained Luffy's Gear 5 to the What If Luffy 8 Unknown Mythical Zone. Please enjoy this fanfic. And the What If Rayleigh trained Luffy's Gear 5 part 2 is coming soon. Please comment your fanfic ideas down below. And can you get 5 likes? Enjoy. You won't beat me this time. World merely smirked at the rubber man's cocky attitude. He kicks the ground in front of him and thrusts his hand forward. More tenfold shotgun. The pebbles and dust that World kicked up shot toward Luffy like bullets, forcing him to dash out of the way. He quickly pumps his legs to accelerate his blood flow. Second gear. Luffy jumped into the air and stretched his arm back to give it more thrust. Gum. At that moment, World grabbed a handful of the debris before jumping at Luffy and grabbing a hold of his leg. Thinking fast, Luffy's arm shoots toward World's ugly head. Jet bullet. Luffy slams his accelerated fist into World's face, sending the man spiraling toward the ground. He quickly recovers midair and lands safely. Rubbing a thumb over the bleeding wound on his face, World started fuming with anger. Luffy, still steaming, glared at World with a calm and cool expression, waiting for him to make the next move. World charged madly at Luffy, coating his entire body from head to toe in armament hockey. Luffy stood his ground, waiting for the right moment to predict his movements and intercept them accordingly. His eyes flashed red for a moment as he could see that World was about to unleash a flurry of blows. To match his power, Luffy applied hockey to his arms. More 70-fold speed. Gum jet gatling. Blow after blow, their fists clashed in a barrage of punches powered by hockey and a determination to win. Periodic flashes of black lightning sparked from Luffy's side while sending a small shockwave of Conqueror's hockey at his large opponent. This invisible disturbance made the destroyer of the world flinch, losing his grasp on his current assault and slowing him down, giving Luffy an opening. His jet gatling was now pummeling away at World's hockey-coated chest, ceasing his own punches. Luffy screamed out as his lightning-fast punches were finally putting this rotten old man in his place. The rubber man finally ceased his attack, seeing that World was still on his feet but groaning in pain as he now had noticeable bruises all over his front. That was for kidnapping Hancock sisters. But Luffy wasn't finished with him yet. Deactivating second gear and hockey, he then puts his thumb between his teeth, third gear, and blows air into it. His entire arm was now inflated like a balloon, growing to the size of a giant's arm. He pushes all the air into the end of his arm, which then became a giant fist with an elephantine round wrist. He coats his enlarged fist in hockey before charging at the stunned World. Gum elephant gun. The giant black fist came flying at World, who suddenly broke out of his daze and smirked sinisterly at the incoming attack. Just before Luffy's fist could connect, World jumped up high while pulling his arm back and shouting. More 20-fold shotgun. He throws the debris, which he picked up earlier, at Luffy, who saw the projectiles coming but didn't have enough room for defense. Without much time to think, he covered his face with his free arm before getting pelted with the hockey-infused pebbles, which Luffy couldn't deflect. Screaming in pain from getting multiple deep wounds, Luffy pulled his inflated arm back. At that moment, Luffy's arm deflated, the air escaping through his mouth like a geyser. Just as the last of the air got out, Luffy's entire body shrinks down to the size of a toddler. He fell on his back, gasping for air. He didn't know until now that, because of his constant exposure to sea prism stone, the old side effects of shrinking after using a third gear technique were back, even though he managed to get rid of the side effects before Rayleigh placed a handicap on him. The effects from the sea prism stone were still lingering in his body. It takes about a minute for Luffy's body to reform to its usual shape and size, but that was time that he couldn't afford. Looks like my prediction was spot on, World said as he walked toward Luffy menacingly, 30 seconds exactly. Luffy did it again. He prioritized brawn over brains. He stared at World, who was looking down at Luffy's pitiful form. Crap, what's wrong with me? Luffy thought, nothing's changed at all. What am I gonna do? World wrapped his beefy hand around Luffy's tiny little body and picked him up like a plush toy. Without the energy to resist, Luffy could only croak as World puts the squeeze on him. Save your friends, huh? And your brother? World said, huh? You can't even save yourself. Before World could think of what to do with Luffy next, the whole ship started shaking, followed by the sounds of cannon fire coming from outside. World kept his firm grip on Luffy while looking around and trying to figure out what was going on. What's going on now? World demanded until he was interrupted by Biojack's voice from atop the spiral staircase. The Navy's here. The old man shouted, and they're launching an all-out attack on our ship. The impact from a much larger blast shook the entire ship, causing an explosion above them. The ceiling gave way and the open birdcage that was still holding Sandersonia and Marigold detached itself from the chain that was holding it and came crashing to the ground, causing the girls to fall out. Hitting the ground hard, their bodies lay there motionlessly. Paying them no mind, World was distracted by the top of the room being blown off, letting in the bright light of the sun. The metal and wood around it were being melted by streams of lava, as if the ship was struck by an erupting volcano. The Navy? Balalolo. World chuckled, perfect. What now, World? Biojack asked worriedly as he came down the stairs. I didn't expect the Navy to fall into our lap. Time to change our plan. We got the perfect opportunity to hit him where it really hurts. World turns to the old man before commanding, prepare the cannon. Are you mad? Biojack shouted back, if we fire from such a close range, our whole ship's going to sink from the impact. The old man coughed sickly. Who cares? World shouted, just get it ready. But I thought the ship was Biojack started fearfully. Was what, a symbol of our freedom? World finished in disgust. Biojack gasped in shock, taken back by the dark look coming over World's face. Don't you get it? This ship's just a tool for getting what I want, World snarled with a dark grin, the rest of you always clung to your foolish dreams, but I made up my mind long ago, even before I escaped Impel Down. Then you guys picked me up in this ship and I saw that massive cannon. So I did what anyone else would do. I decided to take advantage of the situation and use it to achieve my own goals. It's not like you can blame me, you did a good job building it. You've been using us all along. Biojack fearfully confirmed, is getting revenge on the world government all you care about? And so what if it is? I don't care about the ship. And I sure as hell don't give a damn about what happens to you dirty traitors. But Garam. Biojack was horrified at the man's words, and Knighton and Sebastian too, they fought for you because you're their friend. Yeah, right, World spat venomously, I haven't trusted you or anyone else since the very beginning. I don't really need any of you and I never did. No way, Biojack said, refusing to believe it, that's not the brother I know. Luffy, still coiled in World's meaty fist, flinched. They're brothers. You lot aren't any different from this ship. World walked near the fallen birdcage, picking up a handful of rubble that was laying around it with his free hand and tossing it up and down, just a bunch of tools and nothing more. World, no. Biojack cried out, tears building up in his eyes. You may be my brother, but if you can't follow orders, World said, pulling his arm back as he was about to throw the rubble at his brother, then I don't need you. Gum balloon. Before he realized it, World's throw was suddenly cut off by Luffy, who instantly inflated his body like a balloon, causing World to lose his grip and push him back. How dare you stop me? World shouted, this is between me and my brother. Why don't you mind your own damn business already? Without giving him a straight answer right away, Luffy deflated to his normal size again. Panting lightly, his eyes were shadowed over by his black hair. His fists shaking in anger, his teeth clenched tightly and hockey coating his arms, Luffy growled. A bunch of tools. Is that what you said? He demanded coldly, that's what you think of your friends, your brother? Yeah. What's it to you, huh? World asked. At that, Luffy just lost it. Screw you. Luffy shouted in rage. Moving fast enough, Luffy delivered a solid punch to World's face, his hockey-coated fist glowing with a shade of red as they made contact. World was sent crashing to the ground, his one-horned helmet falling off and rolling across the room with a loud clattering sound. Luffy? Called out a concerned voice. Looking toward the corridor he came from, Hancock emerges, running with Salome behind her. For some reason, her dress was torn up and full of holes, as if it was eaten by termites or corrosive acid. Thankfully, her privates were still covered, but her body left little to the imagination. Not that Luffy really cared. Hurry. Luffy shouted back at Hancock, grab your sisters and get out of here now. World sits back up, recovering from Luffy's punch before noticing Hancock, the pirate empress. Me and this guy have unfinished business. Luffy declared as World got back up. Hancock saw the two men glaring at each other. In a moment, she understood the situation between them before nodding at Luffy. She then went over to the wrecked birdcage, shaking her sisters awake. Mary. Sonia. Hancock called, let's go. Big sis. They both called out as they woke up, relieved to see their beloved sister. Pushing themselves up, they made their way to the exit, hoping to get back outside, where the perfume Yuta was waiting. Before heading back to freedom, Hancock stopped to warn Luffy. Careful. As soon as you've taken care of him, come straight back to the ship. Hancock called out before running after her sisters. She knew she could trust Luffy to make it back alive. You got it. Luffy called out, this blowert is mine. It doesn't matter, I don't need the Empress as a hostage anymore. Now World stated before looking back at Luffy, you wanna keep fighting? Go right ahead. Heading into their fighting stances, it momentarily became a standoff with the two combatants staring at each other without so much as a blink. Suddenly, Luffy broke the staring contest by closing his eyes, raising his head, and taking a deep breath. This only seemed to amuse World. "If you're saying a prayer, don't bother," World sneered, "nobody can save you now." "And who's gonna save you?" Luffy shouted back, opening his eyes and shifting his body into second gear. "You cocky, little brat." World shouted back as he coated his entire body in armament haki. Throwing the first heavy punch, Luffy dodged, dashing behind him, and slugged him hard in the face, knocking him back. World steeled himself before staring at Luffy, whose fists were burning hot with red-shaded haki. "I'm not losing to an arrogant jerk like you again." Luffy roared as he delivered a stretched sidewards kick into World's gut, knocking the wind out of him for a moment. World was in a raging fit as he retaliated with a series of punches. But Luffy was able to predict and avoid all of them swiftly and with ease. Friends are not tools that you can just use and throw away. World finally managed to land a punch right in Luffy's face. But the rubber man grinned as he blocked it with his haki-coated forehead. "There's nothing wrong with abandoning the useless." World smirked arrogantly at Luffy. "After all, you left your brother to die at Marineford." Luffy blinked. That wasn't gonna work on him anymore. He had finally overcome Ace's death while at peace with the fact that he died while protecting his little brother. None of World's taunts and lies were ever going to bring him down again. "You don't know anything," Luffy shouted, stretching both arms backward, far across the room. Gum Eagle Bazooka." Luffy's arms delivered a lightning-fast impact to World's gut, blasting him across the room. Just before he reached the deadly spikes decorating the walls, World recovered after coughing up a bit of blood, now having more burning wounds to his person. "But what you said earlier, you were right," Luffy said out of the blue, causing World to look at him while covering his newest injury. Luffy was slowly walking toward the injured destroyer of the world. "I was weak. I couldn't save Ace's life. But he sacrificed himself so that I could keep on living. I'm still alive, and I'm never gonna let his death be in vain. I still have my crew, my friends who believe in me, and I want to protect them. They're all waiting for me to get stronger." "Enough, already." World shouted out before striking, but Luffy moved fast enough to dodge with disappearing speed. World was able to keep up with Luffy, and soon their brawl continued in midair, both fighting equally as hard, going completely on the offensive, and ignoring any pain that they endured. "I will become stronger." Luffy yelled through his attacks, "I will protect my friends. And I will become king of the pirates." The pace of the battle was increasing, with both hitting the other harder and faster, with World being unable to keep up with Luffy any longer. The black-haired fighter's full strength and speed were returning with every punch he threw, giving him the chance to pound World hard enough to fling him backwards, causing his back to crash back down onto the floor. "Brother." Biojack cried out worriedly. Luffy landed, his face still raging as can feel his power continuing to rise. "But before I do that, I'm kicking your ass," he yelled. "You're stubborn," World raised his head, baffled as he muttered, "but that's not enough to beat me." World wasn't out of the picture yet. He pushes himself up, concentrating the last of his haki into one final attack. But he wasn't the only one thinking that. Gum pumping more blood through his body, Luffy yelled out as he unleashed all his might, Hawk Gatling. More hundredfold speed." World shouted, his whole body coated in haki once again. The two collided, yelling and unleashing hell upon each other. Their punches caused mild shockwaves throughout the room, while streaks of black lightning were on Luffy's side. Slowly, but surely, World was being overpowered, his opponent's punches pushing him back. World knocked Luffy's hands back as he jumped towards him in a desperate attempt to finish him off. Luffy shut his eyes and threw a fist behind him. Putting every last ounce of power he had left, he coated his arm with what remained of his haki. Gum. Shouting as he opened his eyes, his arm began to feel hotter and hotter, causing it to glow red hot. This made World's eyes widen in shock as the burning fist came back. Zooming through the air, Luffy's arm grew so hot to the point that it exploded in a burst of golden flames, covering his fist in fire. With a powerful roar, Luffy brought the fist forward, punching World square in the chest. The impact was hot enough to send a blaze of fire through his body, which then burst out from his back. Red Hawk. World was sent flying even harder than before, causing him to crash into the spike-ridden wall, impaling the large man. He cried out in pain as blood flew out of his mouth, but still seemingly alive. Biojack feebly made his way to his dying brother's side. Catching breath, Luffy panted heavily as he shifted out of second gear. He stared at his arm, the flame slowly dying down. "What is this?" Luffy croaked as he stared at the dying flame in confusion, "Since when could I?" The moment just before it was extinguished, Luffy could have sworn he saw the flame change from gold to pure white. After his mysterious flame and haki faded away, Luffy was suddenly interrupted by a loud explosion from outside that shook the whole ship, causing him to lose balance. His fight with World pushed him to and beyond his limits, which rendered him in an exhausted state. Remembering that the Marines were here, Luffy knew that he was out of time and had to leave. Knowing that it was finally over, he gazed over at World's defeated form one last time. I promised Rayleigh and Hancock that I'd make it back, Luffy muttered, limping toward the exit, so there's no way I'm dying here. My friends are still waiting for me. Passing through the exit, out of sight of the now defeated World pirates, Luffy whispered. It was a good fight, Burndy World. Not long after departing from the site of his recent victory, Luffy, once again, finds himself lost in the cube-ridden corridors. If I ever see another cube again after this, it'll be too soon, he muttered, having no idea where he was going. Now, where's the stupid exit? In his exhausted state, he ran slowly in a crooked serpentine pattern. It was harder to keep his balance with all the shaking and explosions that were causing the ship to fall apart. Looking frantically for a way out, the tremors were suddenly getting worse, causing more of the ceiling to collapse around Luffy. What now? He cried out exasperatedly, losing his footing. The magnitude of the shaking grew even further when an avalanche of rubble was falling toward Luffy. Too weak to move, he lowered his head and shut his eyes, bracing for impact. But instead of getting buried alive, he suddenly felt someone grab him before feeling a draft rushing through his hair. He opened his eyes to reveal Rayleigh carrying him with his arm over his shoulder while speeding through the collapsing corridors. "Rayleigh?" Luffy cried out weakly. The old man smiled proudly as he turned toward his student. "You did good, Luffy. Now, you can relax, I'll get us out of here." Luffy nodded, sighing in relief as he finally dozed off in his teacher's hold. It was unclear to Luffy why Burndy World and his brother, Biojack, had such a broken relationship. But now that the Navy destroyed the Grosseed completely out of the water, with the defeated World pirate still on board, now he'll never find out why. World's toxic words to describe his crew and his intentions for them really pushed Luffy's buttons. For the short time that he knew the destroyer of the world, he was easily able to analyze his character. He was someone who destroys everything in his path, with no regard for the collateral damage he causes or the consequences of his actions. When the repercussions finally caught up to him, he discarded the well-being of his crew, his ship, and even his own brother. To him, that's not how pirates are supposed to live. The Luffy pirates should be people who set out to sea in search of freedom and adventure, as well as fulfill their dreams. Not a bunch of despicable savages who destroy, conquer, plunder, and ruin other people's lives. When he overheard the World Brothers' argument, Biojack mentioned World trying to get revenge on the World government, but they didn't mention the reason why. Luffy knew the World government didn't tolerate pirates unless they were one of the 7 warlords of the seas, but they were the reason that pirates aren't defined the way that Luffy envisioned. The government may hate pirates, but they're the ones who created them. But someday, Luffy was going to change all that. Change the world's view on pirates. All the people who knew Luffy as their friend knew better than most people that he and the other Straw Hat pirates weren't like most pirate crews around the world. Their crimes and track record as a crew consisted of defeating evil pirates, deposing corrupt marines, stopping a civil war, destroying a navy stronghold to save one of their crewmates, while declaring war against the world government by burning down their flag, sailing on a ship built out of illegal wood, assaulting a celestial dragon, invading the most fortified prison in the world. And getting involved in a war between the Marines and the Whitebeard pirates. The feats of the Straw Hat pirates have managed to leave a trail of miracles in their wake. Compared to the rest of the world, Luffy's crew were pacifists. And once Luffy finds the One Piece and becomes king of the pirates, he is going to create a brand new era. An era of freedom, dreams, and adventure. That is his dream. Speaking of dreams, Luffy was finally starting to wake up. Opening his eyes, he saw Rayleigh, Hancock, and the rest of the Kuja pirates sitting around him. Hancock was wearing the same dress as before, but now this one was intact. He was lying on a bed inside the perfume Yuta. Luffy Hancock cried out in relief as she flung herself at him in a tight embrace. "Oh, I'm so glad that you're awake. I was so worried when Rayleigh brought you back to the ship." Pulling back, she placed her hands on his shoulders and asked worriedly, "You're not hurt, are you?" Looking around the room, everyone was smiling, but Luffy didn't think too much of it and just smiled back with his trademark grin. Rayleigh walked closer to his student before pointing out, "I see you managed to get those cuffs off, finally." Letting go of Luffy, Hancock backed away, giving Rayleigh some space to talk to his protege, who helped up his newly bandaged arms. After seeing the state Luffy was in after Rayleigh brought him back on board, Hancock immediately commanded her crew's healers to patch up his wounds. Luffy spent most of the ride back to Liskane resting while he recovers. "Yeah, it was weird," Luffy answered. "I can't really remember how I did it, but I think I was cherry blossoms while I was focusing on my hockey. Next thing I knew, my hands glowed red, and then I could easily break the cuffs off like they were made out of glass." Rayleigh closed his eyes and nodded proudly. "Good. You've already started to get a feel of internal destruction. With a few more months of training, that feeling will become second nature." For now, before we get back to Liskana, tell me everything that you learned. At that moment, Luffy got the feeling that the rest of this trip was going to bore him to death. After the climactic showdown against the world pirates, Luffy and Rayleigh were safely dropped back off on Liskana by the Kuja pirates, where they can continue their training. During the boat ride back, Rayleigh asked Luffy to report what transpired while he was on board the Grosseid. The rubberman explained every detail that was requested of him, much to his annoyance. He recalled how his first fight with World was an eye-opener for his recklessness. Using too much haki at once burned through more energy than his body could provide. A lesson that Luffy quickly took to heart. Rayleigh reassured Luffy that he was planning on teaching him that lesson further on, since multitasking wasn't Luffy's forte. With the awakening of internal destruction, their next lesson was to completely master that power. Before they said their farewells to the Kuja pirates, Luffy couldn't help but ask Hancock why her dress from earlier was torn apart. Assuming he wanted to bond more intimately with her, Hancock gleefully explained how she fought the doctor of the world pirates, Knighton, a short elderly woman with light purple hair. She wore pink eyeliner and a pair of swirly designed glasses, a lab coat, a pink dress, and pink high heels. During the fight, she was able to overcome Hancock's beauty by consuming a variety of medicinal herbs, which, due to their immense bitterness, allowed her to resist Hancock's charms to a certain extent. After drinking a rejuvenating mixed beverage, her body changed from a short 80-year-old hag back to her prime as a young, tall, attractive woman with no wrinkles. Knighton's style of combat was known as Kanpo Kenpo, where her vast knowledge of herbalism was adapted into a fighting style. The strange concoctions that Knighton used on her opponent included a powder that dissolved the fabric on Hancock's dress, tearing it up to the point where it was barely hanging onto its wearer. But, with enough teasing and innocent acting, Hancock was able to break Knighton out of her spell, until she ultimately defeated the doctor. In the end, Hancock's charms were too much for her opponent. Luffy didn't know what kind of answer he was expecting, but he wasn't really satisfied with it. He thought the pirate empress was just trying to seduce him again. Thanks to Rayleigh, Luffy started opening his eyes to women, but chose not to think about it until his training was over. Getting stronger was his top priority. By the time they arrived back in Liskana, its winter season was already setting in with blankets on thick snow covering the entire landscape. After being dropped off, the teacher and students said their goodbyes to their Amazonian friends before making their way back to their campsite, where reignited the campfire to cook the game that they caught on their way back. It was currently dusk, so the two decided to continue their training tomorrow. As the large chunk of meat on a bone continues to cook like a spit, Luffy and Rayleigh sat around the fire on logs that they used as makeshift seats and, sometimes, hard pillows. They both wore thick pelts wrapped around them for warmth. The former was deep in thought, recounting the recent events. Rayleigh, who was enjoying his drink, spoke up first. "So, let's review. You seem to have gotten a grip on observation haki, that's good. Make sure you keep practicing this talent. Those who master it to the fullest can even glimpse into the future." Really, Luffy responded, "That's amazing. What are you going to do when you come across someone who can do that? Think you can take them on? Even after your training is over, you might not be able to make the cut, you know. It'll be really tough even if you're pushing yourself even harder. I guess it'll just depend on what the person is like." Rayleigh raised an eyebrow at that. "You mean their personality? Why does that matter? I never thought of it that way." "Well, of course, it matters. If I can get a good read on my opponent before a fight, maybe I can find out what makes them tick. When I was a little kid, Grandpa once told me that anger makes you stupid." Rayleigh chuckled at that last statement, "Ha ha ha ha. Well, your grandfather's not wrong." The old man was expecting Luffy to laugh along with him, but got a frown out of the boy instead. "Still holding a grudge against your old man?" Rayleigh asked. "Yeah," Luffy answered begrudgingly, "when I was little, he nearly killed me over and over again, calling it training." "What did he do?" Rayleigh asked curiously. "He threw me into a ravine, left me in the jungle at night, tied me to a bunch of balloons, then sent me flying, and punched me more times than I could count. If I didn't eat my devil fruit before all that, I would have died ages ago." Rayleigh pondered, "Sounds like your grandpa was trying to toughen you up." "It was torture." Luffy cried out, "He said he did it to make me into a man, so I could become a marine. But I told him a million times that I wanted to be a pirate." The befuddled grandson slammed his knuckles into his palm in frustration. "I swear, if I ever see him again, I'm gonna give him a fist of love. See how he likes it." Rayleigh put a hand on his student's shoulder to try and soothe his rage. Parents have their own special ways of expressing their love for their children. You may think he was trying to control you, but maybe he didn't want you to know how he truly felt. "Whatever, it doesn't matter anymore," Luffy pouted. "How about we change the subject?" Rayleigh suggested. "You said that you were able to remove the sea prism stone handcuffs with your bare hands, right? Tell me how you did it." Luffy raises his right hand, staring into his palm. I felt my haki flowing through my fist and then my whole body started to tingle. When I saw those red cherry blossoms, I felt a new sort of power flowing through me like I could do anything. Maybe I can even grab lightning. Rayleigh laughed at that remark. Maybe you can, Luffy. Maybe you can. Luffy smiled. By the way, I had another look at Vegapink's encyclopedia about your devil fruit and I saw something I probably should have reminded you about. Luffy looked up at his teacher curiously. Yeah. What's that? After you awaken your powers, the encyclopedia mentioned that it would give your stretchy powers more freedom and creativity. That's what we should focus on when we get to that stage of your training. You need to jailbreak your devil fruit by stretching more than you ever have before. I can even give you some ideas if you'd like. Anyway, I'll get the next lesson underway. I'll give you an hour to rest, so you'd better eat fast. There are some tough times ahead, so you'd better be ready. Got it, Luffy replied, thanks. 1 week later. Fourth gear. Luffy coated his arm in armament haki and bit into it, blowing air into his body and inflating his muscles. His size and proportions become much larger and warped. His arms, torso, and legs were coated with flaming tattoo-like haki. His shoulders were also wrapped around with a thin, wispy white cloud of thick steam, like a floating scarf. His hair turned sharper and billowing like a flame. Bounce man. In this form, the added emphasis on Luffy's upper body makes it hard for him to keep his balance, so he has to bounce on the spot constantly. Rayleigh stood a fair distance away from Luffy, with a few of the large native animals watching from the back. You're getting rather creative with your armament haki. You've hardened your skin, but your elasticity has improved a lot as well, hasn't it? That's only the start. Luffy said as he jumped high into the air. The transformed rubber man compressed his legs into his body before quickly thrusting them out simultaneously and pulling them back in. He repeated this process until the pressure generated by his legs made him airborne. As Luffy was now gliding in the air, his teacher from below was amazed at the way his student was applying his rubbery powers. You're filling yourself with air and using compression to fly. Rayleigh commented, but what about your offensive abilities? Stand back and check this out. Luffy bit into his arm again and filled it with even more air, growing it to the size of a giant's. Flying towards a nearby mountain, he begins compressing the enlarged fist into his forearm. Gum King Kong gun. Reaching his target, he unleashes a colossal short-range punch with devastating power at the mountainside, completely reducing the rocky pillar into pebbles and dust. The spectators watching from the sidelines were amazed at the display of power. The giant animals were getting wary of Luffy after witnessing the destruction he just caused. Now, the beasts knew they had to stay on Luffy's good side. Wow. That's very clever. Rayleigh praised as Luffy landed back down. By filling even more air into your fist and compressing it into your arm, you can throw a split-second punch at point-blank range, like a giant piston. Yep. Bounce man, huh? That name certainly gets to the point. Rayleigh then smirks at Luffy, not bad. Luffy flinched, knowing that his teacher was about to test him in a spar. Let's put it through a more rigorous test, shall we? Rayleigh suggested with a devious smile. Pain can be a very effective teacher, right? Luffy reminded himself. Good, you remembered. In the blink of an eye, Rayleigh suddenly appeared in front of Luffy before delivering a punch into the bounce man's gut, sending him crashing into the nearby trees and into the base of the recently destroyed mountain. It didn't hurt Luffy that much, but the shockwave from the impact was powerful enough to shake anyone. What's wrong? That was only one punch. Rayleigh called out playfully. In the wake of Rayleigh's attack, Luffy was left bouncing on his back in the rubble of stone. Damn it, Luffy complained as he recovered. Rayleigh came charging at him again. If you have time to complain, then fight back. Luffy quickly compressed his legs again for a high jump, allowing him to dodge Rayleigh's punch. Once he was at a safe distance, Luffy compressed both his arms before rocketing back toward his sparring partner. Gum. He unleashes a point-blank double punch. Leo Bazooka. But misses and instead destroys more of the rubble. Where'd he go? Luffy looked around frantically through the dust. He turns to a laughing Rayleigh who was standing behind him, who was standing in a calm and mocking pose. Try hitting me this time. The old man taunted. If I charge at him again, he'll just dodge it, Luffy thought with a growl. I need to be faster than I am now. Then let's see if you can keep up with this. Taking a deep breath, let out some of the air in his muscles through his mouth, shrinking himself until he was at least half the size he was as Bounce Man. What also changed was that his hair was now sticking up and flame-shaped, like his haki. The scarf-like gaseous substance around his shoulders became longer and thicker, as it now appeared to be a mix of steam and fire. Snake Man. Fancy, Rayleigh commented. Hunt him down, Python. Gum. Luffy extended his knuckles into a leopard fist before compressing it. He unleashed a long-range attack at even greater speeds. Jet Culverin. The attack came barreling towards Rayleigh so fast that he had trouble keeping up with its speed, even when using observation haki. Whoa. Rayleigh explained in surprise, you were able to gain more speed and mobility by deflating yourself to the point where your body can compensate for the huh. Rayleigh suddenly sensed a hardened fist flying toward his face from the side. Pulling his head back, he barely dodges the speeding leopard knuckle. At that moment, Luffy's arm retracted before he regurgitated all the added air that he stockpiled in his muscles, deactivating fourth gear. Once the air was out, Luffy collapsed on his back, both completely exhausted and immobilized. Rayleigh, processing what just happened with his student, walked over to Luffy's depleted form. You're putting your body through more strain than you can handle. The old man said, shaking his head in disappointment, we'll put the practical tests on hold until your body can cope. Rayleigh bent down to pick up his helpless student before leaning him over his shoulder. Let's get you patched up, kid, Rayleigh said. Hold it right there, Dark King. The old man flinched at the rough sudden voice nearby. Turning to the edge of the jungle, he saw someone emerge from the foliage. It was a tall, tanned, broad-chested and muscular old man with a beard and a stitched scar over his left eye. He wore a red tropical shirt, light-colored shorts and sandals. In his hand, he held a large brown duffel bag. Despite his exhaustion, Luffy flinched before looking up at the source of the all-too-familiar voice. "Gee grandpa," he said weakly. "Thought you could get away from me, did ya, Luffy?" said Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp. "Well, this isn't good," said Rayleigh. "How did the Navy find us?" "A week ago, we received an anonymous tip from one of the 7 warlords," Garp answered. "They said they saw Straw Hat Luffy escaping from the ship of the world pirates before sailing away with the Kuja pirates." Luffy's anger was beginning to rise, both from seeing his detestable grandfather again and hearing the news that someone reported to the Navy about his sighting. "Someone sold me out and it was one of the warlords. But who? The only warlord who was there was Hancock, but she wouldn't do something like that," Luffy thought. Luffy got Rayleigh to put him down, but barely had the energy to stand up straight. "Who was it?" Luffy demanded, glaring furiously at his old man. Garp raised an eyebrow in annoyance, shocked that his grandson still wouldn't respect his elders. "The point of an anonymous tip is not knowing where it came from, you little dumbus," Garp shouted back. Luffy snapped. "Don't screw with me, you bastard. It's bad enough that I have to look at your stupid face again after you let Ace die." Garp's eyes widened in shock. He had never seen his grandson so angry before in his life. But he couldn't really blame him, since all he did was sit there and watch instead of doing anything to prevent Ace's public execution after he was captured and turned in by Blackbeard. However, Garp did pay Ace a visit at Impel Down and discussed family issues, such as Ace and Luffy turning to a life of piracy instead of becoming marine officers like he wanted. But deep down, Garp knew that his plans for his grandchildren were destined to fail from the beginning. "The hero of the marine side, you're still broken up about that, huh? I'm gonna kick your ass for what Yaoue." Luffy tried running towards Garp in anger but collapsed to the ground after a few wobbly steps. Before he could finish his sentence, Luffy's depleted energy finally took its effect, causing him to black out. Later that day. After Luffy passed out from exhaustion, Garp calmly explained the situation to Rayleigh, who was skeptical at first but decided to listen to what he had to say. He carried his student back to their campsite where he began to tend to Luffy's injuries of the day. While patching up his student, Rayleigh asked the Navy hero what he was doing on Lascana. "Since the pirate empress lives so close to here, I figured she must be hiding Luffy someplace less conspicuous. So, I scouted around Amazon Lily's neighboring islands. After a week of searching, I eventually ended up here when I noticed one of the mountains on this island getting completely destroyed. That was Luffy's doing," Rayleigh clarified, causing Garp to laugh hysterically. "Wahahaha. That's my grandson. Are you here by yourself?" Rayleigh asked seriously. Garp sighed, pushing out the giggles. "Yeah, it's just me. I was hopping from island to island after I officially took time off from work." Rayleigh raised an eyebrow in suspicion, but he knew that Garp knew how to use moonwalk, one of the 6 powers. "So, you're not here on the Navy's orders, then?" "If I was, don't you think I'd be in uniform?" Garp smirked. Rayleigh was not amused at his sass. "Then, why are you here?" Garp immediately switched to serious mode. He sat down on the log that Luffy was lying against before looking down at his grandson. He knew he had a lot to prove before he can even begin to ask Luffy for forgiveness. He was too lazy to supervise him and Ace when they were kids, but at least, now, he has the chance to make up for lost time and do something with his remaining grandson that he wished he could do all along. And that was being there for his family. "I'm here to help train Luffy," he paused, "for the new world." "You want to train Luffy?" Rayleigh said as he glared at Garp in disbelief. "For the new world?" "That's right," the Navy hero simply answered with a nod. The 2 veterans were about to get into a moderately heated argument while Luffy remained asleep. Rayleigh gave Garp the benefit of the doubt and decided to hear him out. After all, the last thing Luffy needs is malevolent intruders interrupting his training. But why? Based on what Luffy told me, you just want to control him. You weren't even there for him when he was growing up. You just dumped him in the hands of a bunch of outlaws. Is it any wonder he turned out the way he did? Garp sighed. You're as cut and dry as ever, I see, he chuckled before letting out a sigh. It's true, I'm the one at fault for letting Luffy pursue a life of piracy. All I wanted was to make him into a man and train him to become a marine officer, but I was too stubborn to let him enjoy his childhood. Hell, I almost got him killed on multiple occasions. If it wasn't for that devil fruit he ate, he might not have survived to see today. I hate to admit it, but I think I owe red-haired for that one. That boy was the first of his kind that I haven't seen since Roger's era Peace Main. Rayleigh raised an eyebrow, taken back by the thought that Garp, one of the most exalted marines in the world, actually acknowledged the existence of Peace Mains. I now see that Luffy fits into that category. I tried to convince him that all pirates were just a bunch of bandits that sailed the seas and had no future. I turned a blind eye to the ideology of what Roger stood for, even though I once fought alongside him to defeat a common enemy. The old war veteran gripped the bridge of his nose, letting out a shaky exhale. But you were right, I wasn't there for Luffy. I wasn't even there for Dragon. Just look at what my stupid pride has done. My son became the most wanted criminal in the world, my adopted grandson was murdered by one of my colleagues, I helped spark a war that created probably the most dangerous pirate to date, and despite all the chaos, I chose my job over my family. Garp then vented his frustration by slamming his fist into a nearby tree, shaking it and leaving a clean dent in the trunk. This isn't justice, he growled through his teeth. Moi. Garp's tantrum was interrupted by the moans of his waking grandson, who was most likely woken up by the intense vibrations. Luffy sat up, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes and yawning, when the first thing he noticed was Rayleigh sitting closest to him. Despite being practically in front of him, Garp had not yet been noticed. Hey, old man, can you keep it down? Luffy muttered tiredly at Rayleigh, I'm trying eh. Luffy's vision was starting to come into focus as his eyes shifted to the all-too-familiar figure standing just a few feet away with his arms crossed. His mind goes back to the unexpected arrival of his grandfather back in the clearing. You? Luffy hissed as he squinted at Garp angrily. Luffy's first instinct was to pull off the blanket covering him and throw an enraged punch into his grandfather's face, just like he did at Marineford. However, he managed to compose himself enough to take special precautions to keep himself from rushing into a fight he can't win. He knew full well what kind of power his grandpa pulled behind those punches. And considering their history combined with how seriously he takes his job, Luffy knew he wouldn't last 5 seconds. Easy, Luffy, Rayleigh stepped in to stop his student from getting out of hand. Luffy stared at his mentor out of the corner of his eye for a moment in silence before glancing back at Garp, seeing the passive look on his face. Letting out an exhale through his nose, Luffy leaned back into his makeshift bed and folded his arms impatiently. What are you doing here, old man? Honestly, Garp was expecting far worse. Garp sat down on a log, making himself comfortable before answering his grandson. Well, I already explained my reasoning to Rayleigh, and I don't like repeating myself. So, to summarize, I'm here to help you. Luffy flinched in disbelief before exclaiming, what? Why should I believe you? How do I know you're not just here to arrest me? Garp understood why Luffy was giving him this much lip, but that didn't stop him from getting back into his grandson's good graces. Luffy, Why are you really here? Luffy interrupted, feeling a surge of anger at the old marine, remembering how Garp had failed to protect Ace when he had the chance. No, forget it. I don't want to talk to you. You let Ace die. Before he could get another word out, Luffy lowered his head and panted for air. He was still feeling the effects of the intense training from earlier. During Luffy's recovery, Garp monitored him closely, but with the intense guilt washing over him and making no steps to deny it, dark shadows showed on his face, hiding his eyes. He was guilty. The whole kaleidoscope of doubts and emotions he hadn't felt for a long time had pushed him to the brink of vulnerability. Garp hung his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I know, Luffy. And I'm sorry. I failed both you and Ace. Ignoring the pain, Luffy slowly looked up at Garp. He felt a twinge of guilt at the pain he could see in Garp's eyes. He knew that Garp had loved Ace just as much as he did and that the old marine had been carrying his own burden of guilt since the war. But I don't understand, Luffy said hesitantly. Why didn't you do anything to stop it? You're a marine, you could have stopped the execution. Garp looked up at Luffy, a tear starting to form in his eye. I couldn't, Luffy. I couldn't bring myself to fight against the marines, even for Ace. I was a marine for too long, and I couldn't betray my duty. Luffy looked at Garp for a long moment, then his expression softened. I don't like it. But I think I understand, Gramps. I still can't forgive you, though. At least not yet. Garp looked at Luffy in surprise, then a look of relief washed over his face. Thank you, Luffy. That means a lot to me. Luffy smiled at Garp, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. I'll keep moving forward, Gramps, Luffy said. And I'll make sure that Ace's memory lives on. That's what he would have wanted. Garp nodded, his own resolve strengthening. Oh. There's something else that I should have told you a long time ago. This time his tone was so completely different compared to the strict and demanding voice that he used to address him, hit him, and lecture him. Luffy was stunned momentarily, his voice husky from fatigue again. What is it? Garp nodded gratefully before straightening his posture and clearing his throat. Back when Roger first started out as a pirate, he earned himself an unusual reputation. The man became more famous than infamous. Even as a pirate, he never attacked ordinary civilians unless they asked for it. All the treasure and wealth he gained before he found the One Piece came from looting other pirates who attacked him or swiping them from some ancient ruins. What's your point? Luffy asked. My point is, Roger was, what we in the Marines would call him, a peace main. Luffy looked at him in confusion at the unfamiliar word. What's a peace main? They're a type of pirate that cares little about treasure and, instead, are more motivated by the sense of adventure. Not to say they wouldn't steal or fight other pirates at all. They work towards peaceful resolutions and avoid conflicts as much as possible, Garp explained with the tone of a professional storyteller. Luffy scratched his head. But isn't fighting necessary sometimes? Like when I fought Arlong and Crocodile. That's where the Morganeers come in, Garp replied. Morganeers believe that violence is necessary. They're willing to fight to fulfill their selfish ambitions, even if it means getting their hands dirty. Morganeers currently outnumber peace mains 1,000 to 1 easy. Luffy nodded thoughtfully. So, which one do you think I am? Garp smiled. You're a bit of both, Luffy. Sometimes you need to use your fists to protect the innocent and make sure justice is served. Other times, you can use your words and find a peaceful solution. Luffy hid his smile. I guess I'll have to live with it. He turns his gaze to the former vice captain of the Roger Pirates, was the king of the pirates, really a peace main. Well, Rayleigh paused, the captain never really put any fancy labels on himself, aside from just calling himself the captain of a pirate crew. I guess some people just recognized a few of his good deeds, which were unusual behavior for normal pirates, and they started referring to our crew as the peace mains on a few occasions. Garp chuckled. That's exactly how I started to see Luffy's crew after I met them back on Water 7. Luffy turned to face his grandfather with a skeptical glare. Wait, if you knew about this all along, then why didn't you just tell me back when I was a kid instead of trying to force me to become a Marine? Garp took a deep breath before answering. I wanted you to become a Marine because I believe in justice, Luffy. The Marines are the ones who uphold justice and protect the innocent. I wanted you to be a part of that. Luffy frowned. But isn't justice about helping people? Like how my crew and I helped the people of Alabasta. Exactly, Luffy, Garp said, nodding. The Marines are there to help people and protect them from those who would do them harm. I wanted you to be a part of that, to harness your strength and use it to make a difference in the world. The Marines aren't exactly the saints that everyone wants to believe they are, Garp. You know that, right? Rayleigh intervened, his voice calm as usual. Garp sighed. I won't deny that the Navy has seen its fair share of corruption among its ranks. But that's why we need good Marines like you, Luffy. Ones who will stand up for what's right and do the right thing, even if it's hard. Luffy looked down at his hands, thinking. I like helping people, Grandpa. But I don't want to be a part of something that hurts them too. Garp shuffles closer to Luffy, putting his hand on his grandson's shoulder. I understand, Luffy. And I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe in. Just remember, there are good and bad people in every organization. It's up to us to make sure we're on the right side of things. Luffy nodded, a determined look in his eyes. I can do that. But don't think that I've forgiven you yet. I'm still gonna be king of the pirates one day, so I'm gonna get stronger than anyone in the new world. And I'll help people along the way no matter what. Garp smiled. I know you will, Luffy. And no matter what path you choose, I'll always be proud of you. Luffy smiled back, genuinely. Anyway. Garp exclaimed, patting Luffy on the back, since I'm here, I've got a whole year in my schedule to help improve your skills before I have to get back to Navy HQ. Rayleigh chuckled. It's good to have you with us, Garp. Luffy could use all the help he can get. Luffy frowned. Hey, I'm not that weak. Garp laughed. Of course not, Luffy. But there's always room for improvement. Luffy pouted childishly, crossing his arms. DFFF. Whatever. The old Marine couldn't be any more proud of his grandson, pleased to hear the progress he was already making under Rayleigh's tutelage. The old Marine reached into his pocket and pulled out a rolled up piece of paper. Here, Luffy. I have something for you. Luffy took the paper and unrolled it, revealing his latest wanted poster. He looked at the image of himself with a grin, pleased to see that his bounty had increased yet again. Wanted. Better alive. Monkey D. Luffy. 400 million. Wow, 400 million berries. That's a lot. When did it go up? Garp chuckled. You always have been quite the troublemaker, Luffy. After what you pulled off at Marineford, it's no wonder the world government has put such a high price on your head. Luffy shrugged. I don't care about the money. I just want to have fun and become stronger so I can become king of the pirates. Garp nodded, a serious look on his face. I know, Luffy. But you have to be careful. The higher your bounty gets, the more dangerous your enemies become. You'll need to stay on your toes if you want to survive. Luffy nodded, his expression turning serious as well. I know, Gramps. That's exactly why I need to train harder than I ever have before. And I won't let anyone stop me. I'll keep fighting and growing stronger until I achieve my dream. Garp smiled at Luffy's determination, proud of his grandson for his unwavering resolve. I know you will, Luffy. Just remember, I'll always be here to support you from now on, no matter what. Luffy grinned back at Garp. Thanks, Gramps. And with that, Luffy tucked his latest wanted poster safely in his pocket. He had a long way to go before he became the Pirate King, but with the invaluable training that is to come, his crew by his side, and his family's support, he knew he could achieve anything. 1 year later. After that fateful night, Luffy began his training with Rayleigh and Garp. They started with mastering all 3 forms of Haki that they both knew, teaching Luffy how to use his observation Haki to not only sense the presence of the world itself around him, but to peek mere seconds into the future. Holding nothing back, Garp would dart around Luffy, trying to surprise him, but Luffy's senses were so sharp that he could always anticipate Garp's movements. Next, they moved on to armament Haki, teaching Luffy how to channel his Haki into solid objects, bypassing any defense and destroying them from the inside out. Garp was an expert at this, and he sparred with Luffy, showing him how to use the full extent of his strength. Finding nothing harder than stone to test it on, Rayleigh enlisted the help of the Kuja pirates to provide them with large thick steel slabs to be used as sturdy training dummies. It was then Rayleigh's turn to help him master his Conqueror's Haki, teaching Luffy how to not only overwhelm his opponent's willpower, but also utilize it with such precision that he can avoid accidentally using it on his own allies, while his opponents will still feel the full force of his presence. Finally, they moved on to the 6 powers, teaching Luffy how to use his body as a weapon in the event that his devil fruit powers were off the table. Garp was a master of the 6 powers, and he showed Luffy how to use Tempest Kick to slice through objects, Moonwalk to leap incredible distances, and Shave to move at lightning speed, although Rayleigh already taught him that last one. Luckily, Garp was there to perfect it. It was grueling work, but Luffy was determined to master these techniques. He trained day and night, pushing himself to his limits and beyond. And with Rayleigh and Garp's guidance, he began to improve at an incredible rate. As time passed, Luffy's training continued. He became stronger and faster, his Haki growing more powerful with each passing day. He was almost at his peak, but there was still one final step in his training that he had to accomplish, awakening his devil fruit. And finally, the day came when Garp declared that Luffy had mastered everything he had to teach him. The trio stood on the beach of Liscana, preparing to bid farewell to each other. The old Marine had been thoroughly impressed with the progress that his grandson had made over the past year, and he knew that he could leave the rest of his training in Rayleigh's capable hands. You've come a long way, Luffy, Garp said, smiling proudly. I'd say you've got what it takes to become the king of the pirates. However, I know that isn't enough to satisfy you. Rayleigh clapped Luffy on the back. Don't worry about a thing, Garp. I'll still be here to see Luffy's training through to the end, every step of the way. Grandpa, are you sure you have to go? Luffy asked his grandfather sadly. Luffy had come to forgive his grandfather for his follies in the past year. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could choose to forgive and move forward rather than hold a pointless grudge. Garp nodded. Yes, Luffy. Duty calls. There are some things that I have to take care of, but we'll see each other again before you know it. Luffy pouted slightly, but he knew that Garp had important work to do. Okay, Grandpa. Stay safe. Garp ruffled Luffy's hair affectionately. Don't worry about me, Luffy. I've been through worse. Just keep up your training and continue to grow stronger. I have no doubt that you'll become king of the pirates someday. Luffy grinned, a determined glint in his eyes. I will, Gramps. And when I do, I'll make sure you're there to see my rise to the throne. Garp smiled back at Luffy, then turned to Rayleigh. Take care of my grandson, Rayleigh. He's still a bit reckless, but I know he's in good hands with you. Rayleigh nodded. Don't worry, Garp. By the time I'm done with him, he'll have already surpassed both of us. Garp chuckled, then turned and prepared a moonwalk trip back to base. As he jumped through the air, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness at leaving his grandson behind. But he knew that Luffy was in good hands and that he had a bright future ahead of him. As he glided away from Lascana, Garp couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his grandson. He knew that Luffy was destined for great things and he couldn't wait to see what the future held for the young pirate. With only less than 9 months left to train and firm determination blazing in his breast, Luffy was going to make every minute on the path to awakening count. It's been 6 months since Garp's departure. With the full mastery of Haki under his belt, Luffy was now on the path to awakening the human fruit model. Nika. Rayleigh explained to his student that, to awaken a devil fruit, the user must master their ability, but they must also wait for their body and mind to catch up to their power. So, Rayleigh gave Luffy plenty of opportunities to master his powers. He needed to know how to control his powers, use them in various situations, and adapt to different challenges. Luffy had already mastered the basics, but he still needed to focus on expanding his abilities, pushing himself to the limit, experimenting with new techniques and strategies, and finding new ways to use his powers to their absolute limit. The most important step was to develop his Haki. Haki was the key to unlocking the full potential of his devil fruit. It allowed him to control his powers with greater precision, to imbue them with greater strength and speed, and to tap into new abilities that he never knew he had. This was why mastering Haki was the first step in Luffy's training. After more than a year of living in the hard climates of Lascana, Luffy became adept at observation, armament, and conqueror's Haki. All that was left was finding a way to forge his newfound power into the key that unlocks his devil fruit's true power. The colossal animals of the island were now completely submissive to Luffy, treating him like their king. The sheer magnitude of the rubber man's growing power quickly dwarfed the instinctive strength of the beasts. But Luffy wasn't the type to rule over anything, since he won't be staying on the island for much longer. He always believed that freedom was the greatest aspiration, and he refused to take that away from anyone, even animals. To their relief, Luffy chose to befriend the beasts instead of eating them. During the last few months, Rayleigh had set up Luffy to spar with him every day to push him to the limit. Luffy stood atop a rocky outcrop, his eyes closed in concentration. He took a deep breath and focused his mind, calling forth the power of his devil fruit. Fourth gear. Suddenly, his body began to swell and bulge, growing larger until he was nearly twice his normal size. His muscles bulged and rippled, his black hair long and flowing like a flame, and his skin turned a deep shade of red. The steamy substance that coiled around his shoulders became noticeably less opaque, becoming more like a cloud. Snake Man. Usually, Luffy would have to bite into his arm to inflate his muscles, but after constant use of this transformation, he eventually gained the ability to make the biting, as well as the constant bouncing in place, redundant. He was now able to inflate any part of his body at will. As he stood there, Luffy felt a familiar burning sensation in his chest. It was the same feeling he always got when he used fourth gear, a feeling that told him he was pushing his body beyond its limits. But Luffy was determined. He knew that if he wanted to awaken his devil fruit, he would need to master this technique. And so, he forced himself to ignore the pain and continue practicing. "Are you ready for this?" Rayleigh called out from the clearing below. He jumped from the rocky outcropping and landed on the ground with a thunderous boom. The ground shook beneath his feet and he grinned as he felt the rush of power coursing through his veins. Luffy stood across from Rayleigh, his muscles bulging and his red-shaded armament Haki reflecting the sun's rays. He was ready to once again spar with his mentor and show off his new abilities. "Let's go, old man," Luffy shouted, his voice ringing across the clearing. Rayleigh chuckled and cracked his knuckles. "Careful, Luffy, the old you is showing. Remember, this is an all-out brawl. I'm not gonna hold back even a fraction of my power, got it?" Luffy nodded with a grin. "Hit me with your best shot." The two men charged at each other, their fists flying. Luffy moved with incredible speed, darting back and forth as he tried to land a blow on Rayleigh. He felt lighter than air, his movements almost too fast for the eye to follow. But the old man was just as fast, dodging Luffy's attacks with ease. He moved with fluid grace, his body seemingly made of water as he flowed around Luffy's punches. Luffy grinned, enjoying the challenge. He knew that Rayleigh was one of the strongest fighters in the world and he was determined to show him what he was capable of. He took a deep breath and focused his mind, feeling the power of his devil fruit surging through his body. Gum. Then, with a fierce shout, he launched himself into the air, his arms extended in front of him. Hydra. With a fierce shout, Luffy unleashed a flurry of omnidirectional attacks. His fists flew like lightning, each blow striking with the force of a sledgehammer. But Rayleigh was unfazed. He blocked each of Luffy's punches with ease, his body moving like a well-oiled machine thanks to his observation Haki. Luffy continued his onslaught, his punches becoming faster and more powerful with each passing moment. Eventually, they became too fast for even Rayleigh to endure. He felt a surge of excitement as he pushed his limits, his body humming with power. Rayleigh seemed to be the only one to notice that Luffy was in full control of the trajectory of his attacks, giving him more mobility, speed, and freedom to his elasticity. He saw it as a sign that Luffy was on the right path to awakening. Luffy always enjoyed the challenges that the old man gave him. He knew that Rayleigh was one of the strongest fighters in the Grand Line and he was more than determined to prove himself. But no matter how hard he tried, Rayleigh was always one step ahead of him. He seemed to anticipate Luffy's every move, dodging his attacks with ease and counterattacking with devastating force. After a few minutes of non-stop punches, Luffy ceased his attack. He knew that using the same attack over and over wasn't gonna get him anywhere, but he refused to give up. Luffy felt a thrill of excitement as he realized that he did manage his own against Rayleigh so far, even in his Snake Man form. But then, something happened. Rayleigh began his next attack, his movements becoming even more intense and ruthless, and Luffy found himself struggling to keep up. Suddenly, Rayleigh's hockey-coated fist connected with Luffy's side, sending him flying across the clearing. He crashed into a tree, his body bouncing off the trunk and landing in a heap on the ground. Luffy groaned, feeling a sharp pain in his side. He struggled to get up, but his body refused to cooperate. He looked up at Rayleigh, his eyes wide with shock. The old man was standing a fair distance from him, a smug look on his face. "Don't tell me that's the best you can do," he taunted. Luffy shook his head, trying to catch his breath. "Not even close," he gasped. He felt a surge of anger and disappointment. He had thought that he was ready to face anyone, but now he realized that he still had a long way to go. With fierce determination, Luffy pushed himself back to his feet. Even after one punch, he was bruised and battered, but he refused to give up. "I'm not done yet," he said, his voice low and determined. Rayleigh nodded, a look of pride in his eyes. "Then, show what you're made of." The two men charged at each other once again, their fists flying. Luffy was still in pain, but he refused to let it slow him down. He dodged and weaved, his movements more fluid than ever. He could feel his strength and speed returning, and he knew that he was getting closer to reaching the peak of his power. However, Rayleigh blocked, deflected, and evaded each blow effortlessly, his movements smooth and fluid. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Luffy delivered a powerful blow to Rayleigh's abdomen. The old man stumbled back, his eyes wide with surprise. With the final shout, Luffy charged at Rayleigh, ready to show him what he was truly capable of. Gum. Pulling his arms forward, he coils them together tightly like a drill. And then, with a fierce shout, he released a rifle-like punch at high speed, unleashing an unstoppable frontal attack at his opponent. Dragon Culverin. Distracted by the steamy image of a serpent forming around Luffy's arms, the old man summoned as much haki as he could to soften the blow. On impact, Rayleigh was sent flying in a spin, his body coming to a stop as he crashed into a few trees. Retracting his arms and letting out a relieving exhale, Luffy grinned, feeling a surge of pride. After many months, he had finally done it. He managed to land a solid blow on Rayleigh. Before Luffy could celebrate his self-proclaimed victory, Rayleigh appeared in the air in front of him. "Who says we're done yet?" he said before delivering a hockey-coated leg into Luffy's face, sending him flying toward a mountainside. The old man wasn't exactly happy about it, but Luffy asked him to treat him as his enemy while they sparred so that there were no reserves of strength between them. Even after mastering his observation haki to the point that he could see brief seconds ahead of time, Rayleigh was still faster and smart enough to not let Luffy get used to his teacher's fighting style and changed it randomly every time they sparred. Luffy wasn't the only one getting stronger. The rubber man recovered mid-flight before he made contact with the mountain. With a new technique he created by combining the principles of moonwalk and his elasticity power flight, he rocketed towards Rayleigh like a speeding bullet. But then, without warning, Rayleigh's expression changed. His eyes narrowed and his conqueror's haki washed over Luffy's soul. He was prepared to strike back at Luffy with even greater force. The old man disappeared in a blur, his arms flashing with haki. Catching Luffy off guard, he delivered a sucker punch to Luffy's gut, which the rubber man was too distracted to evade. Luffy writhed in pain, gasping for air and struggling to catch his breath. Rayleigh was not holding back at all. He brought down a devastating kick atop Luffy's head, sending him crashing towards the clearing, his body slamming into the ground with a sickening thud that created a massive dust cloud on impact. Once the dust settled, Rayleigh saw Luffy laying on his back in a large crater with his limbs spread out, his scalp bleeding heavily and running down his face. Luffy groaned, feeling the pain spreading through his body. He tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. He looked up at Rayleigh, his eyes flaring with perseverance. Luffy has suffered worse damage than this, and he refused to back down when things were finally starting to heat up. Rayleigh looked down at him, his expression serious. "In a real fight, your opponent won't hold back. You need to be prepared for anything." Luffy knew long ago that Rayleigh was no pushover, being a legendary pirate. They were about evenly matched at this point, but Rayleigh would always outsmart him enough to turn the tide of battle. Gritting his teeth, Luffy slowly got back on his feet, still maintaining his transformation. He looks up at Rayleigh, grinning like a man possessed. "Thanks for the tip, old man," Luffy said. "But I'm not gonna let you win this time." Several hours later. The legend and the legend in training were both put through the ringer all day. Before they knew it, the sun was already out of sight. We find our two combatants in a pile of broken earth at the bottom of a large trench. The magnitude of their fight reached a critical point where Luffy's heavier attacks devastated a sizable portion of Lascana, including the ditch they were currently in. Rayleigh, whose body was covered all over with wounds, sat down with his back against the wall of the ditch. He panted in exhaustion while feeling reminiscent of the last time he went all out in a fight. While catching his breath, he turns to see the state of his opponent's student. Luffy's condition was even worse. Luffy, out of his fourth gear form, was lying on top of the rubble of the destroyed earth, covered in blood that leaked out of more severe wounds. His eyes were darkened, signifying that he was unconscious. He was unresponsive and his breathing became very shallow. As Rayleigh sat there, looking at his protege, he can't help but notice that Luffy focused more on offense rather than defense. He left himself wide open at almost every turn, which gave the old man many opportunities to strike more often. Maybe he wanted this to happen. The old man thought. Luffy pulled out all the stops with his rubbery powers. Throughout the fight, he extended the range of his arms to even further distances, while the mobility and speed of his attacks were even greater. Rayleigh was sure that Luffy was on the brink of awakening, yet there were still no results. Their day-long sparring match was perilous, but the legendary pirate hoped that Luffy at least learned a valuable lesson after his defeat. Feeling exhausted for the first time in so long, Rayleigh decided to nod off right where he sat since he just got comfortable. Bod-um. 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 Bod-um bod-um. Bod-um bod-um. Bod-um-dum-dum. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. While Rayleigh rested, something strange started happening to Luffy's unconscious form. His chest started pulsing with a musical rhythm. His fingers twitched. The faint sound of a drum started resonating from his chest. His darkened eyes clenched tightly. He gritted his teeth. A wide grin spreads across his face. His hair glowed a bright white. His eyes opened wide. His conqueror's hockey flaring to life. He bursts into uncontrollable laughter. S-H-I-I-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I-H-I. Dum-dum-dum, dum-dum. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Dum-dum-dum-dum. Beahahahaha. On his back, Luffy bounced up and down on the pile of shattered earth like an oddly shaped mattress. His heart beats in an odd musical rhythm in his chest. Rayleigh was startled awake from his brief nap at the sudden burst of Conqueror's hockey, his eyes widened at his student's strange transformation. Luffy's hair, eyebrows, and blue denim shorts, with the exception of his sandals, turned completely white, with the former two taking on a more swirly, billowing appearance. The same steamy substance that accompanied his fourth gear form was back, but now it was much thicker and more cloud-like. Losing himself in his laughing fit, Luffy had a hand covering his eyes to hold back his tears of laughter as he continued bouncing, unaware of how his abilities were affecting the environment. At that moment, Rayleigh knew that, without a doubt, Luffy had finally achieved awakening. Luffy suddenly ceased his bouncing and sat upright before stretching his arms to grab the edge of the ditch. He rocketed out of the ditch, leaving Rayleigh to lick his wounds. The old man wasn't sure how to deal with the situation. Despite building up Luffy's strength and abilities to awaken his devil fruit, he neglected to plan for what might happen once they made it to the final stage. Now that the moment of truth has arrived, there was little that he could do to stop Luffy, especially since he was still fatigued after sparring seriously for a whole day. Without a plan to stop Luffy's ridiculous outburst of power, the Dark King decided to leave him alone. After all, he just reached the peak of his devil fruit powers. It was unpredictable what he was capable of now. Let him enjoy the experience until he runs out of steam. Rayleigh admits defeat before succumbing to the effects of Luffy's Conqueror's hockey. He smiles proudly and lets sleep take over. "You've finally surpassed me, Luffy." Luffy had no idea what was happening to him or around him, but he was having too much fun to care. He opened his eyes to reveal that they now had red ring-like pupils that glowed with power. Looking around him, the newly awakened rubber man found himself airborne high above Lascana. Down below, the massive animals, who were woken up by the sounds of intense laughter, stepped out onto the damaged clearing to look up at the source of the noise. They saw a strangely shaped figure in a triumphant pose captured in the foreground of the moon, its silhouette forming in the background. Luffy's laughing fit finally starts to settle down. Keeping himself airborne with moonwalk, he assesses the situation of what he was feeling. "What's happening to me? I feel great. I feel so free. I feel like I can do anything. Overcome with curiosity, Luffy dove down toward the ground, preparing to test out his new powers. Just before contact, Luffy flipped over to land on his feet. On impact, the ground felt and gave way like rubber. The animals that were watching him fell victim to his conqueror's haki and fainted. For a brief moment, he remembered a lecture that Rayleigh gave him about devil fruit users achieving awakening and how their powers will also affect the environment around them. Since Luffy's devil fruit gave him a body made of rubber, that meant that everything he touches will be made of rubber too. In other words, everything around him was now his to control. Luffy smiled wildly as he stretched deep into the rubbery earth until he came to a stop. Gum. He launches himself back into the sky, making the ground shake with its elasticity. Trampoline. He shot up into the air like a mortar, along with all the loose rocks that littered his surroundings before they came crashing back down. With every ounce, he laughed with absolute glee as he continued to defy the laws of physics. He continued to jump around the island like his own personal playground for the remainder of the night. This is my peak. This is fifth gear. Luffy cannot recall ever having this much fun in his life. The next morning. The intense brightness of the summer sun shined once again on the dented island of Liscana. Luffy slowly opened his eyes, his vision blurry at first. As he blinked a few times, the surroundings came into focus and he realized he was lying on a log in the familiar campsite on Liscana. Memories flooded back to him his moment of awakening his devil fruit. With a groan, Luffy pushed himself up into a sitting position, rubbing the back of his head. He could still feel the dull ache from the impact of his mentor's powerful attacks. Memories of their battle filled his mind, flashes of Rayleigh's lightning-fast movements and the overwhelming force behind each blow, to the thrilling adrenaline of having absolute freedom in his new rubbery powers. As Luffy looked around, he noticed Rayleigh sitting nearby, patching himself up with a calm expression on his face. Their eyes met and Luffy couldn't help but offer a sheepish grin. "Hey, old man. How long was I out?" Luffy asked, his voice still slightly groggy. Rayleigh chuckled softly, sheathing his sword. "Hard to tell. I was out before you were. You took quite the beating, but you got right back up. Imagine my surprise when I saw you turning white and laughing like a man possessed." Luffy's eyes widened, memories of what happened after their spar coming back to him in bits and pieces. He recalled how easy it was to move around, the thrill of being able to fly freely and turn everything he touched into rubber. He truly had the time of his life. "You've finally done it, Luffy," Rayleigh said, his voice filled with pride. "Your haki has reached its peak and your attacks have evolved into their full potential. All that's left is to learn how to control your awakened abilities. Remember, there's always room for growth. Never stop pushing yourself." Luffy grinned, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He knew that his journey to become the king of the pirates was far from over and he had much more to learn. "Thanks Rayleigh," Luffy said, excitement evident in his voice. "I never would have made it this far without you." Rayleigh nodded approvingly, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "It was my pleasure, Luffy. Your potential has surpassed my own and I look forward to seeing you claim Roger's legacy." With that, Rayleigh pushed himself up to his feet, putting his supplies away and putting his arms through his backpack. "Where are you going?" Luffy asked. "I have nothing left to teach you, Luffy," Rayleigh answered with a smile. "And, while I'd love to stick around, I need to return to Sabati and finish the coating on your ship. Are you staying here?" Luffy couldn't help but feel a surge of loneliness at the thought of Rayleigh leaving. He had been the only real person he could talk to during his training, with the exception of the Kuja pirates during the Burndy World incident. He was truly grateful for the guidance and support that his mentor provided for him, but he knew their journey together had to eventually end. He knew that the path to becoming the king of the pirates would be arduous, filled with all sorts of conflicts, including being alone, but he was filled with a burning passion and unwavering determination. He knew that he'll reunite with his friends soon. "Well, it's been a year and 9 months since I sent out that message to my crew," Luffy reminded himself. 3D2Y, Rayleigh said, remembering the message. 2 years later instead of 3 days later, right? Luffy nodded. "If we want to continue our journey, we all need to get stronger. After what happened, I'm sure they feel the same way. You still got 3 months. That should be plenty of time for you to get your awakened powers under control." "Yeah?" Luffy perked up with a bright smile. "I can't wait to see how much the others have changed after 2 years. I've still got work to do if I want to protect them and their dreams. So, I'll stay here and work out all the kinks until time's up." But Rayleigh nodded in agreement. "Soon, you'll be able to control your powers however you like." Luffy gazed at Rayleigh, gratitude and determination shining in his eyes. "You got it." Rayleigh smiled warmly, his weathered face reflecting years of experience. The old man reaches into his backpack and pulls out a red bundle with a yellow cloth tied around it, then throws it to Luffy. "Here, a little going away present." Luffy caught the bundle, feeling heavier than it looked. Untying the knot that held it together, a variety of items came falling out into his lap. Stretching out the fabrics, they revealed to be a red, long-sleeved cardigan with 4 buttons, and the yellow cloth turned out to be a sash, specifically designed to wrap around one's waist. Rayleigh thought he could use a new change of clothes when it was time to leave. The items on his lap consisted of all of Dr. Vegapink's Devil Fruit Encyclopedia books, a hefty stack of cash worth about 10 million in notes, and an intact pair of familiar handcuffs. Luffy curiously picked up the handcuffs to confirm his suspicion. When his fingers made contact, he instantly felt a tingle go through his whole body. They were definitely made from sea prism stone. "What's all this for?" Luffy asked in surprise. "It's a reward for all your hard work," Rayleigh answered proudly. "I got those handcuffs from the World Pirate ship while you were busy. I took them in case we needed a spare set to use for your training, but you've improved so fast that they became redundant. Why don't you hold on to them? I'm sure your crew could put them to good use." Luffy scrunched his face before taking a moment to think. "I'll bet Usopp and Frankie could make all sorts of things out of this stuff. I'll have to remember to keep an eye out for more on our journey." Rayleigh gave him a nod before turning to walk away to the shoreline. "I'll see you back on Sabati in 3 months," Rayleigh says before informing him, "the Kuja pirates will pick you up a week before you have to meet your crew. They'll know where to find you." "Thanks Rayleigh. For everything." As Rayleigh disappears out of sight, Luffy couldn't help but feel sad at being alone after all the time they spent together. But, while his strength had indeed grown, so did his mental capabilities, mostly thanks to his grandfather's strict educational methods. Luffy had learned how to act more like a leader to his crew, including the virtues that came with those responsibilities. Patience was now a part of Luffy's vocabulary. A trait that he knew a certain cook would be more than happy about. As he looked up to the sky through the forest canopy, his eyes were filled with the determination to never stop growing. Time was fast approaching, and he was gonna treat each remaining day like it was his last. The sky's the limit. 3 months later. The white blankets of winter's snow covered the landscape. Luffy had spent the last few months on this secluded training ground, honing his awakened skills and pushing his limits to new heights. With the time to reunite with his crew only 1 week away, Luffy was getting ready to leave. With all his bare essentials already packed, all he had left to grab was his treasured straw hat. "Luffy?" A distant female voice called out. "I'm coming, give me a sec." Luffy replied with relative volume. As the snow crushed beneath his sandals with every step, he made his way to where he left his most prized possession. He stopped in front of a short fat tree surrounded by stones, some of them nearly as tall as himself. This was the only safe place on the island due to the pollen that the tree produces, which the animals find extremely repulsive. Luckily, it was tolerable to humans. Sitting on one of the stones was Luffy's straw hat, covered with snow, but still completely intact with Rayleigh's beaver card still tucked into the red band. Luffy let out a relieved sigh before smiling. "Time really sneaks up on ya, huh?" Luffy muttered with an excited grin. 2 years already. He reaches out to grab the top of his hat. "Well, partner, the wait is finally over." He pulls the hat off the rock, letting the snow fall off of it before walking away with it in hand. Meanwhile, back at his campsite, the giant gorilla and alligator were sitting around the lit campfire, fighting over a large chunk of meat on the bone like a pair of bickering bruisers. Standing next to a nearby tree was Margaret, who was watching the beast's roughhousing. Her observations were interrupted when the colossal lion appeared and prowled towards her dangerously. Margaret gasped, startled by the beast. She pulled out her snake weapon and pulled back an arrow. The lion roared in response, sensing the threat from the Amazon warrior. "Hey." Before either could make the first attack, they were suddenly interrupted by the commanding voice of Luffy, who casually walked towards them while holding his hat to his side. This caused all the beasts to suddenly freeze with fear at the sight of the rubber man. "Find someone else to eat." "She's my friend," Luffy said, his voice full of authority. He gave the animals a stern glare, emphasizing his warning, to which the beasts complied without complaint. Margaret sighed in relief before lowering her weapon. "Hi Luffy. The ship is all ready to sail. Give the word and we'll be off," she said happily. "Got it. Thanks." As if on cue, the Boa sisters and the Kuja pirates appeared on the scene, all impressed at Luffy's commanding aura. Hancock giggled, "I should have known. He's the boss of the whole island now," Sandersonia said. Luffy stopped in his tracks in front of the trio of beasts. "Yeah, it's kind of a shame," Luffy said. "I was originally planning on eating these guys. But, after Rayleigh left 3 months ago, I was starting to feel lonely. So I decided to make friends with them instead, and I'd feel pretty bad if I ate my friends, right? Still, they do look pretty yummy." Luffy's new friends all lowered their big heads, mildly disappointed that their boss would still think of them as food. "Don't you worry about food," Hancock said as she placed a hand on her cheek and blushed. "I have all of your favorites ready and waiting on the ship." Since I'm so thoughtful, I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to get married right away. 2 years later and she was still an oblivious, lovesick drama queen. Luffy, on the other hand, had matured enough to fully realize what Hancock's true intentions were by now. He saw her as a good friend, but nothing more. Which made this next part all the harder on them both. Luffy turned and casually made his way towards Hancock, who was expecting some sort of intimate agreement to her proposal. Once Luffy stopped in front of her, he reached up and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. Hancock moaned slightly, flinching at the touch of the man she fell in love with. "Listen, Hancock." "Aooh," he said, "my name Again. I can't marry you." Hancock gasped sharply with a look of horror. But when she saw the look in Luffy's eyes, she found a glint of fire in them, proving that Luffy was in serious mode. The pirate empress composed herself before letting Luffy continue. "I'm gonna be king of the pirates one day. That means I'll be more free than anyone else in the world. How can I truly call myself a free man if I just trade it all away with something as binding as marriage?" Hancock's reaction was another overly dramatic swoon. She moaned in delight before slouching and placing the back of her hand over her forehead. "You're so wise, my dear. I've been such a fool. What was I thinking? I should be sad about your cold heart, yet mine is on fire." Luffy sighed, shaking his head in disappointment. "Oh, well. I tried. But that display out of the way, Sandersonia decided to step in. Rayleigh informed us on the time to pick you up, so I'm guessing he's waiting for you at Sabati now," she clarified. "Yeah," Luffy confirmed. "I learned everything he could possibly teach me, and then some. I've completely mastered hockey, then awakened my devil fruit." He turns back toward his animal friends, "All that's left is to say bye to these guys, now." As he got closer to them, he gave them all a genuine smile. "So long, you guys. Thanks for keeping me company." The rubber man slowly places his trusty hat on his head, grinning with excitement and determination. "Time to go." The bright sun illuminated the vast ocean as the perfume Yuta sailed through the calm waters of the Grand Line, carrying the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates, Monkey D. Luffy. After 2 long years of arduous training with the legendary Silvers Rayleigh, the time finally came for Luffy to reunite with his crew and continue their journey to the new world. Perched on the ship's bow, Luffy's excitement was palpable. He could hardly contain his anticipation. His eyes sparkled with unbridled enthusiasm as the sight of his destination slowly rose on the horizon. "I see it." Luffy called out to the Kuja pirates who were out on the deck. "I can see Sabati." As the ship gradually neared the infamous archipelago, Luffy couldn't help but reminisce about the last time he had been there. It had been a chaotic and dangerous place, with powerful pirates and slave traders prowling the streets. But this time, things were different. Luffy had grown substantially more powerful, and his resolve to protect his friends burned brighter. Boa Hancock, dressed in her regal attire, stepped out onto the deck and stood behind Luffy. "This is as far as we can go, Luffy. So we'll have to say our goodbyes here," Hancock said calmly. Luffy stepped off the bow at her voice and stood in front of the pirate empress. "We cannot let anyone discover the nature of our relationship," she added. Hancock didn't show it, but Luffy could tell that she crying on the inside, not knowing when or if she'll ever see him again. "I understand," Luffy nodded in reassurance. "I've prepared." Hancock pauses as she pulls out a fake nose and mustache and holds it over her face. "A disguise for you." "Haha, are you kidding?" Luffy chuckles. "I can't pull that look off." "Perhaps, but..." "Besides," Luffy holds up a finger, interrupting her, "I have a much better disguise. Check this out." Luffy buries his hand into his hair, which suddenly turns a flaming white. He pulled out a chunk of the hair by a handful. The pulled hair then begins to shape and take the form of a white walrus mustache. Luffy placed his magically created facial hair over his upper lip and grinned proudly at his spectating benefactors while his hair changes back to its usual black. The entire crew reacted very comedically. Their jaws almost hit the floorboards and their eyes were as wide as dinner plates. "Oh, yeah, I guess you didn't know I could do that, huh?" Luffy scratched the back of his head shyly. "Ever since I achieved awakening, I can create things out of my hair. Pretty cool, huh?" He gave the Kuja pirates a moment to recover from their awe, since they were not used to seeing such a ridiculous display of power. Once the awkwardness had died down, Hancock walked closer to Luffy and pulled the hood of his cloak over his head. The pirate empress gave it to him from her personal wardrobe to conceal his identity from the world government while he makes his way to reunite with his crew. "I suppose any disguise will work, but you must be careful," she said, adjusting the rim of Luffy's hood. "Keep your face hidden at all times. The world may believe you've been dead these last 2 years, but that won't stop anyone from recognizing you the first time you get into trouble. So, if you ever want to set sail again, you'll take my advice to heart." "I'll do my best," Luffy nodded. "Thanks." "You're welcome." Hancock then walked over to an impossibly large and overstuffed backpack. Now, for supplies, I've loaded your backpack with 50 changes of clothes, 1,000 lunches, handkerchiefs, and tissues. You'll also find 3 years' worth of water, snacks, and bug bite ointment. There's also 5 years' worth of towels, toothbrushes, plenty of soaps, hand cream, and lots of silverware. That is entirely too much. Elder Nyan exclaimed loudly. But Hancock responded with the bashful smile of an entranced schoolgirl. There's no need for all that, Luffy said modestly. I'll just take half and use it as my overnight bag. With that, the Kuja pirates helped lighten the load, which still left the backpack relatively big for Luffy's size. The elder still thought it was too much, though. But that didn't matter to Luffy. He rolled the backpack on its side before stepping into the straps, carrying it like a rope-tied mattress. He was now fully prepared to go ashore. "Well, I hope you can find all your friends," said Margaret. "Thanks again for the ride, ladies." Luffy bowed respectfully, a gesture of etiquette that was literally beaten into him by his obstinate grandfather. "And for the supplies." Margaret giggled. "We were more than happy to help you. Your most difficult trials may still be ahead of you," Sweet Pea warned. "I hear that Sabati has become a den of crime." Elder Nyan nodded. "And because of that, the Navy has been keeping a tight watch over the goings-on there as of late, my boy. So, be sure to take extra care." Sweet Pea warned again. "Will do." Luffy gave them a thumbs up. "If you ever need assistance, the full force of the Kuja pirates will come rushing to your aid at a moment's notice," Hancock reassured. "Please, don't hesitate to call on us." The pirate empress then turned away with a faint blush on her cheeks. "Also, would you be willing to do me a favor?" "I already said I can't marry you," Luffy jumped the gun. No, Hancock bashfully denied. "All I ask is that, when you leave, you do so without saying farewell," she asked, curiosity mingling with concern. After a moment of silence, Luffy took a deep breath. He had never had to say that to anybody in his entire life, since they were either enemies that he beat up or friends that he wanted to see again. And Luffy knew exactly which side he wanted Bo Hancock to stay on. Looking directly into her eyes. "Hancock," he spoke with sincerity. "You've done so much for me, risked so much. I can't repay you enough." Reaching out, Luffy gently took one of Hancock's hands into his own. Time seemed to stand still as Luffy's lips met Hancock's delicate skin. The world around them faded away, leaving only the warmth of their bond. For Luffy, it was a simple gesture of gratitude, but also an acknowledgement of the sacrifices and unwavering support Hancock had shown him. Hancock's eyes widened and gasped deeply, surprised by the depth of Luffy's gratitude. She felt a flurry of emotions, her heart fluttering at his genuine display of appreciation. Hancock's breath hitched as she felt the soft touch of Luffy's lips on her hand. It was a gesture that stirred something deep within her, a connection that transcended words. Her heart swelled with a mix of emotions: gratitude, affection, and an amplified, undeniable fondness for the young captain. As Luffy pulled away, his eyes met Hancock's, a mixture of determination and kindness shining within them. "Thank you so much for everything, Hancock," he said softly. "I won't forget what you've done for me. You're a really important friend to me." A smile graced Hancock's lips, her eyes shining with a newfound warmth. "Oh, Luffy, you have an extraordinary ability to touch the hearts of those around you," she whispered, her voice filled with admiration. "You've repaid me with your sincerity, and for that, I'm grateful." Their bond, strengthened by Luffy's heartfelt gesture, held a promise of unwavering support and friendship as their journey together comes to an end. Many of the Kuja pirates, mostly the Boa sisters, were still comprehending the amount of affection that Luffy displayed to their beloved empress. "See ya. Moonwalk." With one final goodbye, Luffy tightens his hold on his backpack before leaping off the deck and flying towards Sabati Archipelago, playfully stroking his temporary white facial hair. Despite its name, Sabati Archipelago is actually a massive mangrove forest growing out of the ocean floor, 10,000 meters below sea level. These towering plants were called hustle muscle mangroves. They all had natural white vertical stripes from top to bottom, with large numbers written on each tree. Each tree, or grove, serves as an island on which people can live and build a community. The locals go from one grove to another via man-made bridges that connect around the tree roots. The unique quality of these mangroves is that they are capable of producing a special type of tree sap resin. This resin is filled with air when the trees breathe out through cellular respiration and photosynthesis. This results in the resin forming bubbles that float through the air. Since the resin bubbles are solid and durable enough to lift a person's body weight without popping, the locals have adapted to using this resin in their everyday lives, including merchandising and infrastructure. The archipelago has a total of 79 groves, dividing them into several different areas, with each one dependent on the area. Groves 1 to 29 are the lawless areas where criminals and bounty hunters run amok. Groves 30 to 39 has the bubble-themed amusement park attraction, Sabati Park. Groves 40 to 49 is a tourist spot filled with various shops and souvenir stands. Groves 50 to 59 is the shipping area. Groves 60 to 69 houses the local Marines headquarters. And finally, Groves 70 to 79 is where you'll find all the hotels. Zabadi Archipelago, Grove 13, Shaki's rip-off bar. The familiar sights and sounds brought a mix of nostalgia and excitement. As Luffy landed gracefully on the large mangrove root that housed the familiar establishment, he couldn't help but wonder if his friends were inside too. Determined to find out, he dropped his backpack and hurried through the front door. Entering the bar, Luffy's eyes darted around, searching for any familiar faces. And then, his gaze settled on a figure at the counter. It was none other than his mentor, the Dark King, Silvers Rayleigh. The old man was enjoying a shot of whiskey on the rocks. Leaning behind the counter was another familiar face, Shakiyaku Akashaki, a slim and tall woman with short black hair, holding a lit cigarette. She looked very young despite being in her 60s. Despite their differences in appearance, Rayleigh and Shaki are partners in both business and life. Well, Shaki couldn't help but smile, we were just talking about you, monkey. About time you showed up, Rayleigh said as he turned toward Luffy, his eyes glowing with warmth. Hi Rayleigh. Hi Shaki. Luffy greeted the elders with a wave and a wide grin of joy across his face. Good to see you guys again. Before Luffy got a response, Luffy's advanced observation haki sensed an incoming attack from the counter. The next instant, Shaki placed her cigarette on an ashtray and then disappeared before reappearing in front of Luffy, her leg raised up high, about to deliver a heavy axe kick. Luffy, being the bona fide hockey master that he is, hardened his fist with haki before stopping Shaki's attack by catching her by the ankle with ease. Shaki's eyes widened at how easily the rubber man stopped her attack. She didn't even make him flinch. Shaki suddenly jumped back after Luffy generously loosened his grip. He didn't bother putting his guard up since he was able to sense no malicious intent from the bar owner. Shaki gave Luffy a satisfied smile before returning to behind the counter. What was that about? Luffy asked, tilting his head in confusion. Shaki and I were discussing your crewmates and their order of arrival, Rayleigh answered. Since you were the last to arrive, Luffy, she wouldn't believe me when I told her that you surpassed me, so she volunteered to test you if you ever stopped by the bar. Sorry about that, monkey, Shaki apologized smoothly. I guess my husband wasn't just pulling my hair. She then motions for Luffy to take a seat at the counter. Can I get you anything, hun? Luffy grinned as he took a seat next to Rayleigh. Got any meat? Shaki chuckled, picking up her cigarette and placing it between her lips. Of course, but I've got something even better for you today. How about I introduce you to a new world of taste? Intrigued, Luffy leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. A new world of taste? What do you mean? Shaki went to the shelf behind her, which displayed a collection of differently labeled bottles, before returning with a tray holding various bottles filled with colorful liquids. She lined them up in front of Luffy, who observed them with fascination. Each bottle bore a different label, promising a unique and exciting experience. You're 19 now. Isn't that right? Shaki asked. Luffy nodded. That means you're old enough to drink alcohol, Shaki explained, her voice tinged with excitement. They come in different flavors and strengths. People all around the world enjoy them as a way to unwind and celebrate. I want to see if your tastabids have matured as well. Luffy's eyes widened with anticipation. I've never had booze before. Are they tasty? Shaki nodded, pouring a small amount of the golden liquid into a glass. They can be. But be warned, some are quite strong, and too much can make you lose control. Luffy leaned in closer, curiosity getting the better of him. I'll try it. It may not be meat, but I'm open to new things. I want to taste all of them. With a laugh, Shaki handed Luffy the glass. He raised it to his lips and took a sip, his face lighting up with surprise and delight. The smooth and warm sensation danced across his taste buds, unlike anything he had ever experienced. His eyes widened as the warm tingling sensation spread through his body. The taste was unlike anything he had experienced before, complex, yet somehow comforting. As Luffy continued to sample the different alcoholic beverages, Rayleigh's eyes gleamed mischievously as he observed his former student's reaction. How is it, Luffy? Not bad. Luffy said, a smile spreading across his face. It tastes like a special kind of adventure in itself. I can see why Zoro drinks this stuff all the time. The elder couple chuckled at that aspect of one of Luffy's friends. Speaking of. So, you said I was the last one to arrive, Luffy reminded before his excitement escalated. Does that mean everyone else made it back? That's right, Shaki clarified. Duval and his gang were here earlier, but you just missed them. They suffered a lot of injuries while they were defending your ship. Your friends all stopped here, one after the other. They're all currently out wandering the archipelago to kill time. Oh yeah, the Sunny. Luffy exclaimed happily. How is she? There's not a scratch on her, Rayleigh said. We finished the coating, too. That's great. Luffy smiled with relief. Thanks, old man. Just make sure to give credit where credit's due, the old man nodded before bringing up the elephant in the room. By the way, Luffy, I couldn't help but notice that white mustache. Is it a fake? Oh. Luffy quipped before casually tearing off the white facial hair. Yeah, it's fake. Hancock made me promise to stay discreet until my crew and I can sail away. I don't blame her. After you caused such a stir at Marineford, the whole world is after you. Wouldn't want them knowing you're still alive just yet. Speaking of, Shaggy added before pulling out a sheet of paper that depicted the Straw Hat Pirates' Jolly Roger, with a message written around it. I thought I should mention that your crew has become more renowned than you thought. Luffy took a closer look at the sheet of paper. Urgent crew needed. Curiosity piqued, Luffy carefully read the contents. His eyes widened as he discovered it was an advertisement for new crew members seeking to join the Straw Hats. Confusion clouded his features as he scanned the details. But I'm not looking for new crew members. We're already the Straw Hat Pirates. I don't need scrubs on my crew. Unless. His face furrowed in realization and frustration. Imposters. Determined to unravel the mystery, Luffy stood up from his seat before marching toward the front door. It was great seeing you both again, but I've got to get to the bottom of this. The couple nodded understandingly. We understand, Luffy. But listen closely, Rayleigh began, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. The key is to unveil these imposters' true identities. Seek out those who know us best, our friends and allies. They can help you distinguish between the genuine Straw Hat Pirates and the pretenders. Rayleigh warned, his voice laced with wisdom. Agreed, Shaggy added, you must gather information, follow any leads, and expose the truth. With that, you can put an end to this deception and protect the honor of your crew. Luffy nodded, his determination flaring as he absorbed Rayleigh's words. His fists clenched and a fire burned in his eyes. Yeah. I won't let anyone tarnish my crew's good name. He declared with unwavering resolve. With nothing more to say, the Straw Hat captain rushed out of the bar, closing the door behind him. Tsubadi Archipelago, Grove 47, tourist area. After leaving the bar, Luffy immediately zipped across several groves with his backpack until he spotted the first sign of civilization. Luffy's first steps into the district were met with a whirlwind of activity. The bustling streets were filled with merchants, pirates, and curious onlookers. The Straw Hat imposters seemed to have caused quite a stir, and Luffy was keeping his ears open for any whispers about their whereabouts echoing through the crowd. With a keen sense of purpose and his identity concealed, Luffy weaved through the chaotic streets, his gaze fixed on his goal. He visited shady taverns, frequented any potential pirate hangouts, and followed any lead that might bring him closer to the imposters. As he casually walked through the bustling streets filled with shops and souvenir stands, Luffy immediately noticed the increasing number of pirates hanging around compared to 2 years ago. Some were skulking in the alleys, while some were fighting each other in the middle of the streets. All the locals were either watching their skirmishes play out or decided not to get involved. I bet a lot of these pirates intend on joining the crew of those fakers, Luffy pondered. I need to find a place where lots of pirates gather. Luffy continued to stroll through the busy streets, his senses honed for any signs of deception, while looking from shop to shop for any suspicious characters. As much as he wanted to, he would much rather find his friends first. As much as he wanted to, he couldn't find them that easily, even with his advanced haki, since he doesn't know what their auras feel like. As Luffy delved deeper into the heart of Tsubadi Archipelago, he stopped when he noticed a sobbing figure blindingly running towards him. Or, in this case, galloping. The figure was a full-grown reindeer wearing a blue round cap with a sideways medical cross on the front, a blue backpack with the same sideways cross, a white and yellow striped tank top, and a pair of orange shorts. After a quick observation, the final clincher was the crying buck's remarkable blue nose. Chopper. The Straw Hat captain was exhilarated and content, his spirit soaring high at the sight of one of his dear friends, Tony Chopper. However, in the midst of his euphoria, the talented reindeer wore a somber expression as he charged blindly toward his captain. Chopper had always been the innocent and naive reindeer of the crew, but his heart was pure and his instincts sharp. Luffy knew that whatever made him upset had struck a chord deep within him, leaving him unsettled and hurt. As Chopper was wailing through the bustling street, a familiar voice boomed from in front of him, "Hey. Chopper." Stopping in his tracks, Chopper raised his head, his weeping eyes widened in disbelief. Standing before him was his captain, Monkey D. Luffy, wearing his trademark straw hat, red top, blue shorts, and a wide grin on his face. Taking a whiff of the relief washed over Chopper as he bounded towards Luffy, his hooves leaving tracks in the grass. "Luffy?" Chopper exclaimed, his voice filled with joy and relief. "It really is you. I'm so glad you're here." Luffy's eyes narrowed, a fierce determination taking over his features. "Is something wrong, buddy? You looked upset earlier," he said before cracking his knuckles. "Was someone being mean to you?" Chopper's eyes suddenly widened with concern as he recalled recent events. Wait a second. I'm happy to see you and all, Luffy, but now's not the time for this. Robin is in serious trouble. Luffy's expression shifted from concern to seriousness. What? Robin? He exclaimed, his voice laced with skepticism. Are you sure about that, Chopper? Chopper nodded fervently, tears glistening in his eyes again. I'm positive, Luffy. When I saw her with Zoro and Sanji earlier, she was acting a little strange, and then a couple of guys in suits stuffed her in a sack and ran off with her. She's been kidnapped, Luffy. We have to rescue her. Luffy scratched the back of his head as he tried to piece together what Chopper described. What didn't make much sense was how Robin could possibly be captured so easily, and in a sack, no less. And if she was with Zoro and Sanji, there's no way they wouldn't have immediately pursued her kidnappers. And if Chopper was there, why wasn't he with them now? The answer eventually became clear as day to Luffy. Chopper must have run into the imposters. But just to make sure. Hey, buddy, Luffy asked, gently patting Chopper's soft neck mane, are you sure the guys you ran into were our friends? Chopper reacted with a wet sniffle before answering, well, Zoro did seem to have gained a bit of weight, and Sanji had an afro and was way more scrawny than I remember. And Robin lost some height, I think. Then, I'm sure Robin's just fine. The captain reassured the reindeer, patting his furry neck. Confusion clouded Chopper's face. How can you say that? That is the end, so, thanks for watching. Comment down below with recommendations on what fanfic I should do next. And remember to like and subscribe to my channel.